He worked first in sales, and then he went, by the time the 1920s came along, which was not very far after he had done with RCA, he became the commercial manager. He would, it would not only sales, but also how to develop, how to sell radio, and went up the ladder. And in the, at least the late 20s, early 30s, he became a vice president, then president. His interest in radio had always been high. He called it a radiolette. He thought that there ought to be a radio in every person's home. Up until that point, the radio was only used between companies or corporations for information about their companies. But he wanted to popularize it, and he did so. He was not a scientist. He knew just enough science to be able to promote it very well. He was a promoter, a cheerleader for RCA. And the records show that he sometimes would give 2 or 3 speeches a day to various clubs around New York, as well as getting a reputation outside the city of New York. He would go to Chicago, he'd go to Denver, he'd go to any place where where he thought that people needed to hear about radio and the benefits of radio. Not only would he promote the inventions that were already in people's homes, but he made sure before he went to an event that he had another invention that he was ready to spring on people. He would also say, in 5 or 10 years, here's what you're going to see in your living rooms. And they did it. I mean, it was already invented, so he was sure about what he was doing. People thought he was a mystic, a magician for all of these things. But he knew how to promote. He was well known for his participation in military affairs. He taught at the Industrial and War College at the Pentagon. He was in the service during World Wars I and II, led Signal Corps in both of those wars. His business sense was so great that those who were going to Germany after World War I to talk to the Germans about reparations for their war crimes, which amounted to hundreds of thousands of dollars, he tagged along as one of the friends of one of the negotiators, but he ended up being the liaison between the Germans and the Americans. His plans for those negotiations were handed to his colleagues, and they went and they would try to do what they could do. And finally they said, well, why don't you just go do it instead? No sense in just writing it. Help us out. And he did. He finally, in World War II, his final rank was Brigadier General, and he preferred to be called General Sarnoff. So many of the records after the 40s were directed toward the general at RCA, and everybody knew where they would go.
In 2009, the David Sarnoff Library in Princeton closed and donated 3,000 linear feet of documents to Hagley. The documents included Sarnoff's personal records as well as various RCA technical reports and corporate papers.
There are many press releases. There are public relations materials. There are he himself had collected probably every newspaper clipping that RCA had. He had such a handle on how well RCA was doing in the public that he got to know the public so well that the success of the company was in his hands. Once he quit, it only took about 10 or 15 years for that company to fade away. He also reported and lectured at the United States Army War and Industrial College, which is in the Pentagon. These particular lectures spanned 1926 to 1930. But there are volumes like this. He took all of his speeches and bound them. He was very concerned about the Cold War. So he had volumes about his suggestions and recommendations to presidents, to secretaries of defense. He collected 30 volumes like this with speeches, history. There are original records about the invasion of Normandy. There's history throughout this that are right from what he thought, what his plans were, his recommendations to presidents. He knew so many people. On his 40th anniversary, he would get cards from people like Winston Churchill, Lyndon Johnson, any personality in the world just everybody knew him. I think Sarnoff himself collected everything. He kept all kinds of letters. He kept publicity, news, press releases. We have 28, 30 boxes of press releases that he kept. He was infatuated with what people thought about how he prepared for each and every event that he attended. And afterwards, he just knew what to keep and what not to keep. Hagley is a history of industry, and something that has influenced the 20th century so much should not be neglected. These records are not only a tale of RCA, but a tale of the world. I mean, the communications and satellite right on through what's being done today was based on what he thought about radio and how to use radio waves and microwaves.